You all should know what to do in my courtroom." As the afternoon sun flooded in through the tall windows behind him, Federal Judge Theodore Hargrove leaned back in his leather chair and gazed at Marine Sergeant Marcus Reynolds with thinly veiled contempt. The defendant's charges are a complete fabrication clearly. The two rich young men at the defense table were grinning smugly. They looked immaculate in navy blue suits and white shirts. Their lawyers had already begun packing up their briefcases with the air of a job well done. Standing at attention in his blue service uniform, Sergeant Marcus Reynolds looked the quintessential American soldier. The rows of ribbons on his chest told the stories of classified operations these civilians would never understand. The war had begun, but on the front in some African territory. "Not here, Your Honor, respectfully," was cut off with a wave of his hand. Judge Theodore Hargrove, the gesture as dismissive as shooing a fly away. "I've heard enough of your lies today." Little did the crooked judge know that FBI Agent Claire Vaughn was sitting in the back row, wearing a red blazer and black slacks, ready to plug his bias with her recording device in the hopes of making a case against him. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. The courtroom was abuzz with the idea that injustice was about to be served. The overhead fluorescence and the natural light filtered through the tall windows, so bright it seemed to illuminate the corruption for dozens of onlookers. Every eye in the courtroom seemed on Sergeant Marcus Reynolds. He stood before Judge Theodore Hargrove's raised bench. He wouldn't stand at attention. A soldier always remains professional, even when behind an enemy line and humiliation takes place. Judge Theodore Hargrove, a man whose jowls spoke of too many expensive dinners and whose eyes held the cold calculation of someone who had sold his soul years ago, adjusted his black robes with theatrical precision. "The case before this court is nothing more than a waste of taxpayer money," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of his position, but none of its honor. These two upstanding young men, Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone, have been falsely accused by someone seeking to profit from their family's success. Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone shared a significant look from the defense table. Of the two, the older Trevor was 28, and he wore his navy suit like armor. The fancy fabric fitted to his lean frame. His white shirt was crisp and unwrinkled. Even his silk tie cost more than most people's monthly salary. Christopher's 2 years younger than their father, but just as arrogant. He looks like Toby except for the gold cufflinks. The courtroom lighting reflected off them. Neither man in the gallery sounded alarmed. They were men who had never faced consequences, and in that moment, they had the soft look of a man who hasn't. With every word that escapes the judge's mouth, their smirks only widen. "Your Honor," Sergeant Marcus Reynolds began again. Though the rage building in his chest was evident, his voice was professional. "The evidence clearly shows that these defendants attacked me. Footage from 3 angles and the capture confirmed their crime beyond a reasonable doubt. Many witnesses have corroborated their aggression and the unprovoked nature of the attack." The mock concern in Judge Theodore Hargrove's face could fool no one in the courtroom. "Sergeant Reynolds, you have indeed been in trouble for aggression before, haven't you? Could it be that your military training has made you violent and invented threats?" The judge's comments dripped with condescension and intended to bring you down. Attorneys Benjamin Walsh and Patricia Carmichael sat behind a pricey oak table with their briefcases filled with cases that will never be presented to the court. Benjamin Walsh was thin, had silver hair, wore a suit worn by old money, and was adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Patricia Carmichael, wearing a dress where betting cost more than your car, made notes on a legal pad with a gold pen, actions suggesting total faith in the outcome already being predetermined. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn noticed everything from the back row where she sat. unremarkable in a professional sense among court watchers. Her trained eyes took in everything from the bias of the judge to the utter lack of remorse from the defendants. It was not merely what they were saying, but the way they were saying it that gave her comfort. The disdain and contempt were being filmed. She had witnessed corruption in her life before, but not this openly or cruelly. Court reporter Lila Bennett's fingers flew on her stenography machine, which would capture everything said in court, as her conscience shrieked. For 3 years she had worked in Judge Theodore Hargrove's courtroom, where she saw the man dismiss case after case with the rich defendants. The pattern was unmistakable, the corruption so usual they began to ignore it. Yet it was a little different today. Today she felt that someone is watching, someone is recording, someone is building a case against her. "The evidence you speak of," Judge Theodore Hargrove continued, addressing Sergeant Marcus Reynolds with barely contained hostility, "is clearly manipulated. These security cameras can be doctored, witnesses can be bought, and frankly, your version of events lacks credibility. The Blackstone family has contributed significantly to this community, while you, Sergeant Reynolds, are an outsider seeking to profit from false accusations." Sergeant Marcus Reynolds felt his jaw tighten, his hands clenched at his sides, but his military training held. "I am a Marine decorated," says the man. "I served this country honorably. I am not acting on any financial motive. I do not have a background of making false allegations. I have no motive to place false evidence to support the false allegation against the accused." According to the police report, the battery occurred exactly as described, having been witnessed by several civilians with no ties to me or any reason to lie. "Your Honor," Benjamin Walsh rose from his seat with theatrical precision, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to buying outcomes. "My clients are pillars of the community. Trevor Blackstone graduated summa cum laude from Harvard Business School, while Christopher Blackstone has dedicated his time to charitable work throughout the city. This accusation is nothing more than an attempt to extort money from a prominent family." Patricia Carmichael nodded in agreement, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the courtroom's bright lighting. "Furthermore, Your Honor," she added in a voice trained to project authority, "Sergeant Reynolds' military background suggests a predisposition to violence. His training in combat situations may have caused him to misinterpret a friendly encounter as an assault." The gallery murmured with outrage at the transparent manipulation, but Judge Theodore Hargrove banged his gavel with satisfaction. "Order in this court. The arguments presented by the defense are compelling and logical. The prosecution has failed to meet the burden of proof, and frankly, I question whether charges should have been filed at all." FBI Agent Claire Vaughn adjusted her position slightly, ensuring her recording device captured the judge's every word. She had spent months building a financial profile on Judge Theodore Hargrove, tracing suspicious bank deposits, mysterious investments, and connections to known criminal enterprises. The Blackstone family appeared repeatedly in her investigation, their money flowing through shell companies and dummy corporations before landing in accounts connected to the judge. Today's proceedings would provide the final piece of evidence needed to bring down an entire corruption network. Sergeant Marcus Reynolds straightened his shoulders, his blue service uniform adorned with the ribbons of honor earned through sacrifice and service. The overhead fluorescent lights reflected off his polished shoes and the exact lines across his uniform, and it was an image under siege. "Your Honor," he said softly, "for nothing is more truthful than the fact that justice delayed is justice denied. These men assaulted me without any reason, and to throw these charges out because they have money rather than merit is a slap on the face for this court." Judge Theodore Hargrove's face flushed with anger at the implied criticism. "You forget yourself, Sergeant. In my courtroom, I determine what justice looks like, and justice today means protecting 2 innocent young men from false accusations designed to profit from their success. The charges against Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone are hereby dismissed with prejudice." The gavel fell with the sound of corruption triumphant. But FBI Agent Claire Vaughn smiled slightly in the back row. Every word had been recorded, every biased statement captured, every piece of evidence needed to destroy Judge Theodore Hargrove now secured. Court reporter Leila Bennett continued typing, her machine recording not just the proceedings but history in the making. Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone stood with smug satisfaction, their expensive suits unmarked by consequence, their arrogance now validated by a system designed to protect wealth over justice. Their attorneys packed briefcases filled with files that would disappear into private safes, never to trouble their clients again. As the courtroom began to empty, Sergeant Marcus Reynolds remained standing at attention, his military discipline preventing him from showing the rage and disappointment burning in his chest. The natural daylight streaming through the tall windows seemed to dim, as if the sun itself was ashamed of what had transpired in this place of supposed justice. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn rose from her seat in the back row, her red blazer catching the bright courtroom lighting as she made her way toward the exit. The recording device in her blazer contained enough evidence to bring down not just Judge Theodore Hargrove, but an entire network of corruption that had poisoned the federal court system. Justice had been denied today, but it would not be denied forever. What none of them knew was that this dismissal would trigger the largest judicial corruption investigation in federal history, with Sergeant Marcus Reynolds' case serving as the catalyst for exposing a web of bribery, money laundering, and organized crime that reached into the highest levels of the legal system. The rigged courtroom would become ground zero for the most explosive FBI investigation of the decade. The fluorescent lights overhead in the FBI field office gleamed off the sterile white walls of the conference room as Sergeant Marcus Reynolds sat stiffly in his chair. His blue military uniform appeared to be freshly pressed, despite the storm of emotions he had just experienced in the courtroom of Judge Hargrove. The high windows let in natural light, creating an almost heavenly atmosphere of justice that shone through in the aftermath of recent events. His blue service jacket rested smartly on the chair back, medals glinting away. Here was someone who would understand the meaning of honor, a word which seems to have lost its meaning. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn entered the room with quick steps, her red blouse contrasting with her blue jacket, and my eyes fell down on her carefully manicured hands holding a thick folder. Her presence drew instant focus, not through menace but through a palpable sense of agency. The bright light in the space engendered a fierce aura in her. She put the tape recorder on the lacquered table, and it lit up with a red light. "Sergeant Reynolds," she began, voice authoritative but warm, "what you saw in that courtroom today was not justice. It was dramatically staged. This isn't a regular stunt at all. This is a bad theater that is intended to protect very dangerous people." He was seated across from her at the meeting, and she didn't take her gaze away from his face. "I have been looking into Judge Theodore Hargrove for 8 full months, and what happened with your case today fits a pattern that has been ruining lives and ensuring criminals are protected for many years," she stated from above. Inside Marcus's chest, he felt a glimmer of hope that he thought died forever when the gavel came down on dismissing him. As if the shadows are retreating finally, the fluorescent lights felt brighter in a way. "Agent Vaughn, with all due respect, I have been fighting this system for months. I have knocked on every door, contacted every official, and all of them tell me the same thing. The judge made his decision. You have to move on with your life." "Because they don't know what I know," Claire said, opening her folder, which contained photographs, financial documents, and surveillance images. 47 cases involving members and associates of the Blackstone crime family have been dismissed by Judge Theodore Hargrove over the past 5 years. Sergeant, 47 cases, assault, money laundering, racketeering, drug trafficking, all were thrown out due to technicalities or inadequate proof, even when the proof was irrefutable. Marcus felt as though he's been hit with a punch. 47 cases. Because of a corrupt judge, 47 victims were denied justice and 47 criminals walked free. He clenched his hands, feeling the muscles in his jaw tighten as the significance of Agent Vaughn's words began to sink in. "Now," Claire continued, her red blouse seeming to pulse with determination under the bright lights, "I need you to tell me exactly what happened the night Trevor and Christopher Blackstone attacked you. Not the sanitized version you gave in court, not the careful testimony designed to avoid objections from their lawyers. I need the truth, Sergeant. Every detail, every moment, because I believe your case is the key to bringing down this entire network." Taking a deep breath, Marcus organized his thoughts with military precision. The natural light gave a hyper-realistic feel to the moment that was equally surreal and real. It was Friday night, about 2200 hours, in front of Castellano's restaurant on 5th Street. I just finished dinner with my visiting sister Sarah from Atlanta. As we walked to my car, I heard a woman screaming. His voice grew stronger the more he spoke. And at last, the truth tumbled out like water. The woman, aged around 22-23 years of age, was trying to get away from two men. The men had cornered her at the alley beside the restaurant. One man had grabbed her purse, one man was grabbing her arms. She was terrified, Agent Vaughn, absolutely terrified. Claire leaned in goal-oriented and kept listening attentively to the girl in her dark blue jacket. "What have you done?" "What any Marine would do. What any decent human being should do." Marcus's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "I told Sarah to call 911, and I intervened. I approached the two men and ordered them to release the woman immediately. That's when I got my first good look at them. Well-dressed, expensive suits, clearly under the influence of something. They reeked of alcohol and cocaine." The memory seemed to sharpen in the bright government office, every detail crystallizing under the unforgiving lights. The taller one, who I later learned was Trevor Blackstone, turned to me and said, "Mind your own business, soldier boy, before you get hurt." The shorter one, Christopher, was still holding the woman's purse and laughing like it was all some kind of game. As Agent Vaughn jotted down notes on her pad, she was dressed in a red blouse with black pants. "What happened next?" "I told them I was a United States Marine and ordered them to let the woman go," he said. "That's when Trevor Blackstone got aggressive. He stepped toward me saying, 'Do you know who we are? Do you know who our dad is? We can do whatever we want to whoever we want, and there's nothing anyone can do about it.'" With a pause, Marcus added that the lights began to flicker. "He then made a swing at me." "And you defended yourself?" "Initially, yes. I blocked his punch and restrained him using minimal force. But then Christopher joined in, and it became clear they weren't just drunk college kids looking for trouble. These two had training, Agent Vaughn. They fought like people who'd been in serious fights before. People who enjoyed causing pain." The natural skylight seemed to dim slightly as clouds passed overhead. But the overhead fluorescent lights maintained their steady illumination, keeping everything in sharp focus. Marcus continued, his blue uniform seeming to represent all the honor that had been trampled in Judge Hargrove's courtroom. "They came at me together, coordinated, vicious. Trevor had brass knuckles. Christopher had a knife. This wasn't a bar fight, Agent Vaughn. This was attempted murder. They weren't trying to rough me up or teach me a lesson. They were trying to seriously hurt me, possibly kill me." Claire's pen was immobile. "Police reports never mentioned any brass knuckles or knife," he said. "By the time the police arrived, those things were suddenly gone. Trevor and Christopher said I attacked them without any reason. A story that made me the aggressor, and them just two guys defending themselves against a violent, unstable veteran." Marcus's tone was bitter. The police officers seemed more interested in the version of events than the CCTV cameras that caught everything. "Security cameras?" Agent Vaughn's eyes lit up with professional interest. "3 different angles, Agent Vaughn. The restaurant's parking lot camera, the bank's ATM camera across the street, and the traffic camera at the intersection. All of them captured the assault. All of them clearly showed the Blackstone brothers as the aggressors. All of them documented their use of weapons. Marcus leaned forward, his blue service jacket catching the fluorescent light. But somehow, by the time the case went to trial, the footage was either corrupted, missing, or deemed inadmissible. Agent Vaughn closed her folder and studied Marcus with new intensity. "Sergeant Reynolds, I'm going to share something with you that I probably shouldn't, but I think you've earned the right to know. Judge Theodore Hargrove has received over $2 million in payments from shell companies connected to the Blackstone crime family over the past 5 years. $2 million to ensure that cases like yours disappear." The words hung in the air like an electric charge. Marcus felt his world shifting, the pieces of a massive puzzle finally beginning to form a coherent picture. The bright office suddenly felt like a command center, a place where real justice might finally be possible. "Vincent Blackstone, the father of your attackers, isn't just a wealthy businessman with troubled sons," Claire continued, her red blouse seeming to pulse with determination. "He's the head of one of the most sophisticated money laundering operations on the East Coast. His sons aren't spoiled rich kids who got out of hand. They're enforcers, Sergeant. They attack people who threaten their family's operations, or who simply have the bad luck to witness their crimes." Marcus absorbed this information with military precision, his training helping him process the scope of what he was learning. The woman they were attacking that night? Maria Santos, a waitress at Castellanos restaurant. She'd been documenting suspicious cash transactions she witnessed involving Vincent Blackstone's business associates. Large amounts of money being exchanged, always in cash, always with the same group of people. Agent Vaughn's dark blue jacket seemed to represent the weight of federal authority finally being brought to bear on this corruption. She was going to report what she'd seen to the police the next morning. The natural skylight brightened again as the clouds moved past, illuminating the conference room like a spotlight on truth itself. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope, real, tangible hope, that justice might actually be possible. "How can I help you, Agent Vaughn?" "Whatever it is, you can count on me," he said, the strength of his voice belying the many combat deployments he had already endured. Claire smiled. It was the first time since entering her office, and it was like flipping a switch. "There is a judge I need you to take down, and I want your help to build a case for it. Your assault case is much more than justice for you, Sergeant Reynolds. As you will agree, the case of the New Jersey sergeant reflected a conspiracy that actually unraveled the court. You see, Your Honor, it's the thread that, when pulled, will unravel a conspiracy that has been poisoning our judicial system for years." The fluorescent lights almost popped in surprise as Marcus straightened at his chair. He was every inch the decorated Marine whose honor had been questioned but never broken. Finally, the truth was being told, the alliances were being forged. And for the first time since that gavel fell in Judge Hargrove's courtroom, Sergeant Marcus Reynolds felt like justice may finally be at stake. The morning sun cast sharp beams through the reinforced windows of the FBI's secure facility on Federal Plaza, creating geometric patterns across the polished concrete floor. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed steadily, bathing the classified briefing room in clinical brightness that left no shadow unexplored. This wasn't just any government office. This was where the Bureau's most sensitive cases came to light, where secrets that could topple administrations were carefully examined under the unforgiving glare of justice. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn adjusted her red blouse as she spread classified documents across the steel table, her dark blazer unbuttoned to reveal the service weapon holstered at her side. Across from her, FBI Director Jonathan Hayes commanded attention in his crisp orange shirt and navy blue suit jacket, his weathered hands folded as he studied the preliminary reports from the Hargrove investigation. Between them sat a secure laptop displaying files that bore the highest classification markings the military possessed. Before we dive deeper into Judge Hargrove's corruption network, Director Hayes began, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades in federal law enforcement. We need to understand exactly who Sergeant Marcus Reynolds really is. What we've discovered about his military background changes everything about this case. Agent Vaughn pulled up the first classified file, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The screen filled with military records that had been sealed at the highest levels of government. Documents that revealed a warrior's journey through some of America's most dangerous covert operations. Sergeant Reynolds isn't just any decorated Marine, she continued, her voice tinged with newfound respect. He's led counter-terrorism operations in Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia. Black operations that officially never happened. His unit specialized in high-value target extraction and disruption of international terror networks. Director Hayes leaned forward, his expression growing more serious as each classified mission appeared on screen. Congressional Medal of Honor clearance, he read aloud, his tone reflecting the rarity of such authorization. That's reserved for fewer than 50 active military personnel nationwide. This man has risked his life for national security more times than most agents see in their entire careers. The fluorescent lights above seemed to intensify as Agent Vaughn continued scrolling through Reynolds' service record. Each mission summary painted a picture of extraordinary courage under impossible circumstances. The classified operations in Damascus, where he single-handedly extracted 3 captured CIA operatives. The covert mission in Kabul that prevented a planned terrorist attack on American soil. The Somalia operation where his tactical leadership saved the lives of an entire Marine platoon. Judge Hargrove had no idea who he was dismissing in that courtroom. Agent Vaughn said, her voice hardening with anger. He treated a genuine American hero like a criminal, all while protecting the real criminals who attacked him. Director Hayes stood and moved to the reinforced window, his orange shirt catching the natural light streaming in from above. This elevates everything, Agent Vaughn. When we expose Hargrove's corruption network, the media will understand that he wasn't just dismissing charges against random defendants. He was protecting criminals who brutally assaulted a decorated war hero who served this country with extraordinary distinction. The secure phone on the conference table buzzed with an encrypted call. Agent Vaughn answered immediately, her red blouse shifting as she leaned forward to activate the speaker function. Agent Vaughn, this is Detective Stephen Choi from Financial Crimes. I'm calling from our investigation center with critical findings on Judge Hargrove's financial network. Through the speaker, they could hear the bustling activity of the Financial Investigation Unit, computers processing data, and analysts calling out discoveries across the bright workspace. What have you found, Detective? Director Hayes asked, his voice sharp with anticipation. Detective Choi's voice carried excitement mixed with disgust. I'm wearing my analysis gear and running multiple traces simultaneously. Judge Hargrove's hidden accounts are more extensive than we initially suspected. I've uncovered a systematic money laundering operation that connects directly to Vincent Blackstone's criminal organization. Agent Vaughn activated the secure screen sharing protocol, allowing Detective Choi's financial charts to appear on their classified monitor. Numbers and banking records filled the display, each transaction telling a story of corruption that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. The primary account shows deposits totaling $2.3 million over the past 5 years, Detective Choi continued, his green polo shirt visible through the video feed as he adjusted his blue jacket. But that's just what we can trace easily. The pattern suggests Judge Hargrove has been receiving regular payments for dismissed charges, reduced sentences, and favorable rulings in cases involving Blackstone family members and their criminal associates. Director Hayes returned to his seat, his face growing darker as the full scope of the corruption became clear. How many cases are we talking about, detective? At least 47 cases over 5 years where Judge Hargrove made questionable rulings favorable to defendants with connections to the Blackstone organization. Each dismissal or reduced sentence coincided with significant deposits into his hidden accounts within 72 hours. The overhead fluorescent lights seemed to pulse with the weight of this revelation. Agent Vaughn felt her jaw tighten as she processed the systematic nature of Hargrove's betrayal of justice. This wasn't occasional corruption. This was an entire criminal enterprise operating within the federal court system. Detective, can you trace the money back to its original sources? She asked, her red blouse catching the light as she leaned closer to the monitor. I'm tracking multiple shell companies, offshore accounts, and business fronts that all lead back to Vincent Blackstone's organization. The money flow is sophisticated, but it follows predictable patterns. Judge Hargrove received his largest single payment, $400,000, just 3 days before dismissing aggravated assault charges against Trevor and Christopher Blackstone for their attack on Sergeant Reynolds. Director Hayes slammed his hand on the steel table, the sound echoing through the secure facility. They paid him nearly $500,000 to protect those criminals from facing justice for attacking a decorated war hero. This goes beyond simple judicial corruption. This is a betrayal of everything our legal system represents. Agent Vaughn pulled up additional files on her secure laptop, cross-referencing Detective Choi's financial discoveries with the pattern of dismissed cases. The bright overhead lighting illuminated documents that revealed a shocking pattern of systematic bias and purchased justice. Look at this pattern, she said, pointing to the timeline displayed on screen. Every single case involving minority defendants received maximum sentences, while connected white defendants got dismissals or reduced charges. Judge Hargrove wasn't just taking bribes, he was operating a racially biased court system designed to protect wealthy criminals while punishing the innocent. Detective Choi's voice crackled through the secure connection again. Agent Vaughn, I've found something else. Judge Hargrove has been coordinating with defense attorneys Benjamin Walsh and Patricia Carmichael. They've been funneling money through their law firm accounts, taking commissions for delivering favorable verdicts. This corruption network involves officers of the court at multiple levels. The natural skylight above cast sharp shadows across Director Hayes' face as he absorbed the full implications of the investigation. His orange shirt seemed to glow under the combined artificial and natural lighting that filled the secure facility. Agent Vaughn, this has become a federal investigation of the highest priority. We're not just dealing with a corrupt judge. We're exposing an entire criminal enterprise that has perverted federal justice for years. How many innocent people received harsh sentences while connected criminals walked free? The weight of systematic injustice filled the bright room like an oppressive presence. Agent Vaughn felt the familiar burn of righteous anger that had driven her through 15 years of federal law enforcement. But this case was different. This case involved a genuine American hero who had been betrayed by the very system he had sworn to protect. Director, with Sergeant Reynolds' classified background and the scope of Judge Hargrove's corruption network, we have the foundation for a federal racketeering case that could bring down the entire Blackstone criminal organization, she said, her voice steady despite the anger burning in her chest. Detective Choi's financial analysis continued streaming across their secure monitors, each new discovery adding another layer to the conspiracy. Bank records, wire transfers, and shell company formations painted a picture of corruption that reached into the highest levels of the federal court system. The money trail shows regular payments to court clerks, bailiffs, and even some prosecutors, Detective Choi reported. Judge Hargrove wasn't working alone. He built an entire network of corrupted court personnel who helped ensure favorable outcomes for paying defendants. Director Hayes stood again, his blue suit jacket catching the overhead fluorescent light as he moved with renewed purpose. Agent Vaughn, I want you to coordinate with Detective Choi and build an airtight case against every person involved in this corruption network. Sergeant Reynolds deserves justice, and every innocent defendant who suffered under Hargrove's biased rulings deserves vindication. The secure facility hummed with activity as the investigation shifted into high gear. Agent Vaughn felt the momentum building, the careful accumulation of evidence and testimony that would ultimately expose the full scope of judicial corruption. Her red blouse seemed to mirror the intensity of her determination as she coordinated the expanding investigation. "What's our next move, Director?" she asked, already knowing that this case would define her career and potentially reform the entire federal judicial oversight system. Director Hayes looked out through the reinforced windows at the bright afternoon skylight streaming across Federal Plaza. Citizens walked below, trusting that their government and courts would protect them with equal justice under law. They had no idea how deeply that trust had been betrayed. "We set the trap, Agent Vaughn. We're going to give Judge Hargrove and his corruption network enough rope to hang themselves. And when we're finished, Sergeant Marcus Reynolds will receive the justice he deserves, and the American people will see that no one, regardless of wealth or position, is above the law." The fluorescent lights above seemed to pulse with anticipation as the FBI's most important corruption investigation prepared to enter its critical phase, where classified revelations would become public justice. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the FBI conference room, casting bright natural light across the polished mahogany table where the most important meeting in Sergeant Marcus Reynolds' life was about to begin. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed softly, ensuring every corner of the spacious room was illuminated as FBI Agent Claire Vaughn adjusted her red blazer and checked her watch. Today would be the day they assembled all the pieces of Judge Theodore Hargrove's corruption puzzle, and she could feel the electric anticipation building in her chest. The conference room door opened with a confident sweep, and District Attorney Megan Stewart entered wearing a sharp red dress suit that commanded immediate respect. Her presence transformed the atmosphere completely, bringing with it the full weight of prosecutorial authority that had been missing from their investigation. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn rose to greet her, extending a firm handshake that sealed their partnership in this fight for justice. "Agent Vaughn, I've reviewed your preliminary findings, and I want you to know you have my complete support," District Attorney Megan Stewart declared, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had built her career on taking down corruption. What Judge Theodore Hargrove did to Sergeant Reynolds in that courtroom was an absolute travesty, and if your evidence proves what I suspect, we're looking at the biggest judicial corruption case this district has ever seen. Sergeant Marcus Reynolds sat at the head of the table, wearing his blue military dress shirt beneath a crisp blue service jacket, his ribbons and decorations catching the bright skylight that flooded the room. Despite everything he had endured, his posture remained perfectly military straight, though FBI Agent Claire Vaughn could see the cautious hope building in his eyes as this powerful alliance formed around him. FBI Director Jonathan Hayes entered next, his orange shirt and blue suit jacket projecting executive authority as he carried a thick file folder that would soon reveal the true scope of their investigation. The morning light highlighted the determined set of his jaw as he took his seat, followed closely by Detective Stephen Choi, whose green polo shirt and blue jacket gave him a professional appearance that belied the explosive financial evidence he was about to present. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have uncovered goes far beyond a single corrupt ruling," FBI Director Jonathan Hayes began, his voice filling the bright conference room with commanding presence. "Detective Choi's financial investigation has revealed a systematic corruption network that has been operating under our noses for years, and Sergeant Reynolds' case was just the tip of an enormous iceberg." Detective Stephen Choi opened his laptop and activated the large wall monitor, filling it with financial documents and bank records that told a story of greed and corruption spanning half a decade. The bright overhead lighting made every detail crystal clear as he began his presentation that would change everything they thought they knew about Judge Theodore Hargrove's criminal enterprise. Over the past 5 years, Judge Theodore Hargrove has received exactly $2.3 million in bribes from Blackstone Enterprises and their associated shell companies, Detective Stephen Choi announced, highlighting specific transactions on the screen. The money was funneled through a network of fake consulting firms, bogus legal retainers, and phantom real estate deals, all designed to hide the connection between the Blackstone crime family and judicial decisions. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn felt her anger building as she studied the financial evidence that painted a picture of systematic corruption. Each transaction represented another case where justice had been perverted, another victim who had been denied their constitutional rights, another family destroyed by a judge who had sold his oath for money. But the corruption network extends far beyond Judge Hargrove himself. District Attorney Megan Stewart interjected, pulling out her own files that detailed the broader conspiracy. Defense attorneys Benjamin Walsh and Patricia Carmichael have been actively participating in this scheme, coordinating with their clients to ensure maximum bribes reach the judge's accounts in exchange for favorable rulings. The revelation hit Sergeant Marcus Reynolds like a physical blow, and he gripped the edge of the mahogany table as he processed the full scope of the conspiracy that had destroyed his faith in the justice system. These weren't isolated incidents of corruption, but a carefully orchestrated criminal enterprise that had been stealing justice from countless victims for years. Detective Stephen Choi clicked to the next screen, revealing a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts that showed the sophisticated nature of the money laundering operation. Benjamin Walsh established at least 7 different consulting firms that existed solely to funnel bribes from Blackstone clients to Judge Hargrove's personal accounts. He explained, his voice growing more intense as he detailed each layer of deception. Patricia Carmichael was equally involved, using her law firm's trust accounts to wash money through fake legal settlements and bogus mediation fees. Detective Stephen Choi continued, highlighting specific transactions that proved the defense attorney's active participation in judicial bribery. They weren't just benefiting from Judge Hargrove's corruption. They were essential partners in making it work. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn stood and moved to the evidence table where she had arranged physical proof that would make their case unshakable in any honest courtroom. The bright natural light streaming through the conference room windows illuminated documents, photographs, and electronic devices that contained years of criminal evidence. "We have something even more powerful than financial records," FBI Agent Claire Vaughn announced, activating a second monitor that began playing security camera footage from the night of Sergeant Reynolds' assault. This is the actual footage from outside Romano's restaurant, showing exactly what happened when Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone attacked Sergeant Reynolds. The room fell silent as they watched the brutal assault unfold on screen, captured in stark detail by multiple security cameras. Sergeant Marcus Reynolds could be seen intervening to protect a young woman from harassment, followed by an unprovoked and vicious attack by both Blackstone brothers that left him bloodied and injured on the sidewalk. This footage proves beyond any reasonable doubt that Sergeant Reynolds was the victim of an unprovoked assault, FBI Agent Claire Vaughn stated, her voice hardening with righteous anger. Judge Theodore Hargrove dismissed charges against the attackers despite having access to this same video evidence, demonstrating clear judicial bias and corruption. District Attorney Megan Stewart studied the footage with the analytical eye of a prosecutor who had built her career on seeking justice for victims. The bright conference room lighting allowed her to see every detail of the assault, and her expression grew darker as she witnessed the deliberate brutality inflicted on a decorated Marine who had been protecting an innocent woman. This video alone would be enough to convict both Blackstone brothers in any honest court, District Attorney Megan Stewart declared, her voice carrying the authority of someone who understood exactly how juries would respond to such clear evidence. Judge Hargrove's dismissal of charges becomes even more egregious when viewed alongside this undeniable proof of assault. The conference room door opened again, and court reporter Lila Bennett entered, wearing a conservative blue dress and nervous expression that immediately conveyed the importance of her testimony. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn had spent weeks convincing her to come forward, knowing that insider testimony would be crucial to proving the systematic nature of Judge Hargrove's corruption. "Miss Bennett, thank you for finding the courage to join us today," FBI Director Jonathan Hayes said, his voice gentle but encouraging as he gestured for her to take a seat at the polished table. "We understand the risks you're taking by speaking out against judicial corruption, and your bravery will help us ensure justice is finally served." Lila Bennett's hands trembled slightly as she opened her own folder, but her voice grew stronger as she began sharing testimony that would expose years of judicial bias and corruption. The bright overhead lighting seemed to give her confidence as she detailed pattern after pattern of discriminatory rulings and suspicious behavior. "I've been Judge Hargrove's court reporter for 8 years, and I've witnessed systematic bias against minority defendants that goes far beyond anything that could be explained by normal judicial discretion," Lila Bennett testified, her voice growing more confident with each revelation. "In cases involving wealthy white defendants, especially those connected to the Blackstone family, Judge Hargrove consistently dismissed charges, reduced sentences, or found technical reasons to exclude prosecution evidence." Sergeant Marcus Reynolds felt validation flooding through him as Lila Bennett's testimony confirmed that his experience wasn't isolated but part of a deliberate pattern of discrimination and corruption. The bright, natural light streaming through the conference room windows seemed symbolic of truth finally being brought into the darkness of judicial corruption. Judge Hargrove would often make racist comments about defendants when he thought court wasn't in session. Lila Bennett continued, her testimony growing more damning with each revelation. He referred to minority defendants using slurs and frequently expressed his belief that they deserved harsher treatment than white defendants facing similar charges. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn documented every word of the testimony, knowing that Lila Bennett's insider perspective would be crucial to proving the systematic nature of Judge Hargrove's corruption. The combination of financial evidence, video proof, and eyewitness testimony was building an unshakable case that would finally bring justice to countless victims. Detective Stephen Choi returned to his financial presentation, revealing the final piece of evidence that would complete their understanding of the corruption network. "We've also discovered that Judge Hargrove used his judicial position to tip off Blackstone associates about pending investigations, allowing them to hide assets and destroy evidence before law enforcement could act." The full scope of the conspiracy was now clear to everyone in the bright conference room, and the weight of systematic corruption hung heavy in the air as they processed the complete betrayal of judicial responsibility. This wasn't simply about one corrupt ruling, but about a criminal enterprise that had been operating within the justice system for years. District Attorney Megan Stewart stood and moved to the window, looking out at the city where countless victims had been denied justice by Judge Hargrove's corruption network. The morning sunlight highlighted her determined expression as she turned back to face the team that would finally bring accountability to this criminal conspiracy. "We have everything we need to bring down this entire network," District Attorney Megan Stewart declared, her voice carrying the full authority of her office and the determination of someone who had dedicated her life to seeking justice. Judge Hargrove, the Blackstone brothers, and defense attorneys Walsh and Carmichael will all face the full consequences of their crimes. The team spent the next hour coordinating their strategy, preparing for simultaneous raids and arrests that would dismantle the corruption network completely. As they planned their next moves in the bright conference room, Sergeant Marcus Reynolds felt hope building in his chest. For the first time since that terrible day in Judge Hargrove's courtroom, justice was finally coming, and it would be swift, complete and absolutely devastating to everyone who had perverted the system they had sworn to uphold. The morning sun cast sharp beams through the courthouse windows as FBI Agent Claire Vaughn adjusted the tiny recording device hidden beneath her red blazer and dark blue jacket. Her hands trembled slightly as she tested the wireless connection one final time. Today would determine whether months of investigation would finally bring down Judge Theodore Hargrove's corruption network, or if the most powerful man in the federal courthouse would slip through their fingers once again. In the surveillance van parked across from the courthouse, FBI Director Jonathan Hayes monitored multiple screens showing camera feeds from inside Judge Hargrove's chambers. His orange shirt was crisp under his navy blue suit jacket as he spoke into his headset. All units in position. Agent Vaughn, you're clear to proceed. Remember, we need him to explicitly discuss the bribes and case fixes. Without direct admissions, our financial evidence alone might not be enough. Agent Vaughn's voice crackled through the communication system. Understood, Director. Sergeant Reynolds is in position outside the judge's chambers. The recording equipment is functioning perfectly. We'll have everything we need within the hour. 20 feet away from the van, Detective Stephen Choi sat in an unmarked sedan, wearing his green polo shirt and blue jacket, monitoring police radio frequencies. His laptop displayed real-time financial transactions from Judge Hargrove's hidden accounts. 3 separate wire transfers totaling $47,000 had been deposited just yesterday, all traced back to shell companies controlled by the Blackstone crime family. Inside the courthouse, Sergeant Marcus Reynolds stood outside Judge Hargrove's chambers, his civilian clothes feeling strange after years of military uniforms. His green shirt and blue jacket concealed a sophisticated recording device that would capture every word of the conversation to come. His heart pounded as he rehearsed the script Agent Vaughn had prepared, knowing that one wrong move could destroy their entire operation. The courthouse hummed with its usual morning activity as clerks and attorneys moved through the corridors, completely unaware of the federal sting operation unfolding in their midst. Overhead fluorescent lights illuminated the marble hallways where justice was supposed to prevail. But Sergeant Reynolds knew better than anyone how corrupt this particular temple of justice had become. Agent Vaughn's voice whispered through his nearly invisible earpiece. Marcus, remember to let him talk. His arrogance will be his downfall. When he starts bragging about his arrangement with the Blackstones, that's when we'll have him. Stay calm and let his ego do the work. Sergeant Reynolds knocked firmly on Judge Hargrove's chamber door, hearing the familiar gruff voice call out, "Enter." He pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped into the spacious office where his case had been destroyed just weeks earlier. Natural skylight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the judge's mahogany desk and the wall of law books that had become meaningless decoration in this temple of corruption. Judge Theodore Hargrove looked up from his paperwork, his expression shifting from annoyed surprise to barely concealed hostility. "Sergeant Reynolds, you have considerable nerve showing up in my chambers after your case was properly dismissed. I trust you understand that harassment of a federal judge is a serious criminal offense." "Your Honor, I'm not here to cause trouble," Sergeant Reynolds began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "I just want to understand how justice works in your courtroom. The evidence against Trevor and Christopher Blackstone was overwhelming. Video footage, witness testimony, medical records from my injuries. How does evidence like that simply disappear?" Judge Hargrove leaned back in his leather chair, a cold smile spreading across his face. "Justice, Sergeant, is about understanding the complexities of our legal system. Sometimes cases that appear strong on the surface reveal weaknesses upon closer examination. The Blackstone family has significant standing in this community. Their word carries considerable weight." In the surveillance van, FBI Director Hayes leaned forward, listening intently to the conversation streaming through their recording equipment. Agent Vaughn sat beside him, her red blazer bright under the van's overhead LED lighting as she monitored the audio levels and made notes of each potentially incriminating statement. "Their word carries weight because of their money, doesn't it?" Sergeant Reynolds pressed, following Agent Vaughn's coaching to push the judge toward more explicit admissions. "I've heard rumors about the Blackstone family's influence in this courthouse. People say they have arrangements with certain judges." Judge Hargrove's smile widened, his arrogance overriding any caution he might have felt. "Sergeant, you clearly don't understand how the legal system operates at this level. Families like the Blackstones contribute significantly to the proper functioning of justice. They support judicial campaigns, fund courthouse improvements, and ensure that qualified judges can focus on their important work without financial distractions." "Financial distractions," Sergeant Reynolds repeated, sensing the judge's growing comfort with the conversation. "You mean they pay judges to dismiss cases involving their family members?" "Pay is such a crude word," Judge Hargrove replied, standing and moving to his window where the morning sunlight highlighted his expensive suit. "The Blackstones understand that judicial independence requires financial independence. They ensure that judges who properly interpret the law are compensated appropriately for their wisdom and discretion." Detective Stephen Choi's voice crackled through the surveillance team's headsets. "Got him. That's a direct admission to taking bribes in exchange for case dismissals. The financial records will corroborate everything he just said." But Judge Hargrove wasn't finished. His arrogance had taken complete control, and he turned back to Sergeant Reynolds with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. "Your case, for instance, was handled with appropriate discretion. The Blackstone sons were defending themselves against what they perceived as an unprovoked attack from an aggressive veteran with known PTSD issues." "I don't have PTSD," Sergeant Reynolds said firmly, "and the security footage clearly showed them assaulting that young woman before I intervened." "Security footage can be interpreted many different ways," Judge Hargrove replied dismissively. "When the Blackstone family contacted me about their concerns regarding this case, I assured them that justice would be served appropriately. They've been generous supporters of proper judicial function for over 5 years now." Agent Vaughn's heart raced as she heard Judge Hargrove's admissions streaming through the surveillance equipment. Each statement was building their case exponentially, providing the direct evidence they needed to prosecute not just the judge, but the entire corruption network. Judge Hargrove moved closer to Sergeant Reynolds, his voice dropping to what he believed was a confidential tone. "Between us, Sergeant, the Blackstone arrangement has been quite beneficial for everyone involved. Over 40 cases properly resolved, judicial efficiency improved, and community stability maintained. Vincent Blackstone understands that sometimes justice requires flexibility." 40 cases, Sergeant Reynolds repeated, letting his shock show naturally. "You've dismissed 40 cases for the Blackstone family?" 47, actually, Judge Hargrove corrected proudly. "Drug charges, assault cases, financial irregularities. The Blackstone family operates significant business enterprises that sometimes attract unwanted legal attention. My role is to ensure that frivolous prosecutions don't interfere with legitimate commerce." A sharp knock on the chamber door interrupted their conversation. Judge Hargrove called out permission to enter, and defense attorneys Benjamin Walsh and Patricia Carmichael walked into the office. Walsh wore his usual navy suit with a crisp white shirt, while Carmichael was dressed in her standard black business suit with a white blouse. "Your Honor, we didn't realize you had a visitor," Attorney Walsh said, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Sergeant Reynolds. "Perhaps we should return later, when you're available, to discuss the Henderson matter." "Nonsense," Judge Hargrove replied expansively. "Sergeant Reynolds was just leaving. We've had a very productive conversation about how justice operates in this courthouse." Attorney Carmichael stepped forward, her briefcase clicking as she set it on Judge Hargrove's desk. "The financial arrangements we discussed are ready for your review. Mr. Vincent Blackstone wanted to ensure your continued cooperation on several pending matters." In the surveillance van, FBI Director Hayes nearly shouted with excitement. They're discussing active bribery arrangements. This is beyond our best-case scenario. We have them discussing ongoing criminal conspiracy. Attorney Walsh pulled out a thick manila envelope from his briefcase and placed it on the judge's desk. 3 cases scheduled for next month. The usual arrangement, $50,000 per dismissal, transferred through the consulting contracts we established. Judge Hargrove picked up the envelope, weighing it in his hands with obvious satisfaction. Mr. Blackstone continues to demonstrate his understanding of judicial efficiency. These cases will receive appropriate consideration. Sergeant Reynolds stood transfixed, watching the casual exchange of bribes happening directly in front of him. The brazenness of their corruption was staggering, even after everything Agent Vaughn had prepared him to expect. Attorney Carmichael opened a leather portfolio and spread documents across the judge's desk. We've also prepared the paperwork for the Morrison construction case. The environmental violations need to be dismissed before the EPA gets involved. Mr. Blackstone's development projects require judicial protection from regulatory overreach. Environmental crimes, too, Judge Hargrove mused, reviewing the documents. Vincent certainly operates diverse business interests. Rest assured, the Morrison case will be handled with appropriate discretion. The attorneys began packing their materials. Their business concluded with terrifying efficiency. Attorney Walsh paused as he closed his briefcase, looking directly at Sergeant Reynolds. "Your Honor, should we be concerned about discussing sensitive matters in front of outside parties?" Judge Hargrove waved dismissively. "Sergeant Reynolds understands the importance of discretion. Don't you, Sergeant?" "Absolutely," Sergeant Reynolds managed, his voice tight with controlled anger. "I understand exactly what's happening here." As the attorneys prepared to leave, Attorney Carmichael made one final comment that sealed their fate completely. "Judge Hargrove, Vincent Blackstone wanted me to express his appreciation for your handling of the veterans' assault case. He was particularly impressed with how you managed to dismiss such overwhelming evidence." "Professional expertise," Judge Hargrove replied proudly. 30 years on the bench teaches you how to properly interpret evidence and ensure appropriate outcomes." The attorneys departed, leaving Judge Hargrove and Sergeant Reynolds alone once again. The judge returned to his desk chair, clearly pleased with the morning's business transactions. "You see, Sergeant, justice operates at levels you couldn't possibly understand," Judge Hargrove continued, his arrogance now completely unleashed. "The Blackstone family contributes over $2 million annually to various judicial support functions. Courts require funding, judges require independence, and community leaders require protection from frivolous prosecutions." Sergeant Reynolds stood slowly, his recording equipment capturing every word of Judge Hargrove's confession. $2 million for dismissing cases and protecting criminals, for ensuring justice operates efficiently and appropriately, Judge Hargrove corrected. "When this conversation ends, you'll leave my chambers and never return. You'll accept that your case was properly resolved, and you'll avoid any further contact with the Blackstone family. Consider this advice from someone who understands how power really operates in this city." In the surveillance van, FBI Director Hayes was coordinating with tactical teams positioned throughout the courthouse. Agent Vaughn monitored the continuing conversation while preparing for the simultaneous arrests that would begin within minutes. "Marcus, you've gotten everything we need," Agent Vaughn's voice whispered through his earpiece. "Prepare to exit. The arrests begin in 60 seconds. Sergeant Reynolds looked directly at Judge Hargrove, his voice filled with the authority of a decorated Marine who had spent years fighting for real justice. "Your Honor, I think you're going to discover that power operates very differently than you imagine." Judge Hargrove laughed coldly. "Sergeant, you're a foolish man if you believe you can challenge the system that controls this courthouse. The Blackstone family has connections throughout law enforcement, the prosecutor's office, and the federal judiciary. Your little crusade for justice ends here." "Actually," Sergeant Reynolds said, moving toward the chamber door, I think it's just beginning. As he reached for the door handle, the sound of multiple vehicles arriving outside filled the air. Judge Hargrove moved to his window and saw FBI tactical teams surrounding the courthouse, their vehicles reflecting the bright morning sunlight. His face went pale as the realization hit him. "What have you done?" Sergeant Marcus Reynolds smiled for the first time in weeks. "I helped the real justice system catch a corrupt judge who forgot what honor means." The trap had been set perfectly, and now it was about to spring shut on Judge Theodore Hargrove's entire criminal enterprise. The morning sun cast brilliant rays through the tall windows of FBI headquarters as Agent Claire Vaughn adjusted her red blazer and checked her watch. Today was the day they had worked toward for months. The evidence was overwhelming, the warrants were signed, and justice was finally within reach. Sergeant Marcus Reynolds stood beside her in the briefing room, his full-dress military uniform immaculate under the bright overhead fluorescent lighting. Every ribbon and decoration on his chest told a story of service and sacrifice, and today they would tell another story about courage in the face of corruption. His blue dress shirt was perfectly pressed beneath his blue service jacket, each metal polished to perfection. FBI Director Jonathan Hayes entered the room wearing an orange button-down shirt and blue suit jacket, his presence commanding immediate attention from the assembled tactical team. 20 muscular FBI agents filled the space, their tactical gear gleaming under the natural skylight streaming through the conference room windows. "Ladies and gentlemen," Director Hayes announced, his voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "Operation Clean Sweep begins in exactly 30 minutes. We have simultaneous raids coordinated across the city. Judge Theodore Hargrove, the Blackstone brothers, and their corrupt legal team will all be in custody before noon." Agent Claire Vaughn stepped forward, her red blazer a stark contrast against the sea of tactical blue jackets surrounding her. "Team Alpha, you're with me and Sergeant Reynolds. We take down Judge Hargrove at the courthouse. Team Beta handles the Blackstone penthouse. Team Charlie raids the law offices of Walsh and Carmichael." The muscular agents nodded in unison, their faces set with determination. Each wore identical tactical gear over their blue FBI jackets, their equipment checked and rechecked for the operation ahead. Detective Stephen Choi entered carrying thick manila folders, his green polo shirt and blue jacket making him stand out among the tactical teams. "The financial evidence is ironclad," he announced, distributing copies of bank records, $2.3 million in bribes, 47 corrupted cases, and a money trail that leads directly back to organized crime. Sergeant Reynolds examined the documents, his jaw tightening as he read the extent of Judge Hargrove's corruption. "All those innocent people who never got justice," he said quietly, his voice filled with controlled anger. "All those families who trusted the system. Today we restore that trust," Agent Vaughn replied, her hand briefly touching his shoulder. "Today we prove that no one is above the law, no matter how high they sit or how much power they think they wield." The convoy of black FBI vehicles moved through the city streets like a precision military operation. Agent Vaughn sat in the lead vehicle beside Sergeant Reynolds, both watching the courthouse grow larger as they approached their target. The morning sun reflected off the building's windows, casting everything in brilliant natural light that seemed to symbolize the truth finally coming to light. "Radio check." Agent Vaughn spoke into her earpiece. "All teams report status. Team Beta in position at Blackstone penthouse," came the first response. "Team Charlie ready at Walsh and Carmichael law firm," followed immediately. "Team Alpha, we're go for simultaneous execution," she confirmed, her heart racing with anticipation. Inside the courthouse, Judge Theodore Hargrove sat in his chambers, completely unaware of the storm approaching. He wore his traditional black robes, reviewing cases for the morning session. The overhead fluorescent lighting illuminated the law books and legal documents scattered across his desk. the same desk where he had made countless corrupt decisions. The sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway made him look up from his papers. Through his office windows, bright natural daylight streamed in, casting long shadows across the floor. He assumed it was his usual security detail and returned his attention to the files before him. The door burst open with explosive force as Agent Vaughn led the tactical team into the chamber. Her red blazer blazed like a beacon of justice as she stepped forward, badge extended, while muscular FBI agents in blue jackets and tactical gear fanned out behind her. "Judge Theodore Hargrove," she announced with cold authority, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice, and violation of civil rights under color of law." The judge's face went white with shock, his mouth falling open as he stared at the agents surrounding him. His hands trembled as he slowly raised them, the arrogance and superiority that had defined him for so long crumbling in an instant. Sergeant Reynolds stepped into view, his full-dress uniform a stark reminder of everything Judge Hargrove had tried to destroy. The contrast was stunning. The decorated Marine who had served his country with honor, facing the corrupt judge who had betrayed everything justice represented. "You remember Sergeant Reynolds, don't you, Your Honor?" Agent Vaughn said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "The man whose case you illegally dismissed. The decorated Marine you showed such contempt for in your courtroom." Judge Hargrove's eyes darted between the agents and Sergeant Reynolds, panic replacing his usual judicial composure. "This is outrageous," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I'm a federal judge. You can't just—" "We have recordings of your confession." Agent Vaughn cut him off, producing a digital device. "We have financial records showing every bribe. We have testimony from multiple witnesses. Your corruption network is finished." Across the city, Team Beta smashed through the doors of the Blackstone brothers' luxury penthouse. Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone, still in silk pajamas and expensive robes, found themselves face to face with armed federal agents. The bright morning sunlight streaming through their floor-to-ceiling windows seemed to expose every shadow where they had hidden their crimes. "Trevor and Christopher Blackstone," the lead agent announced, "you are under arrest for assault, conspiracy, and racketeering under the RICO Act." The brothers' faces showed the same shock and disbelief that their protector Judge Hargrove was experiencing miles away. Their privileged world of immunity and protection crumbled in seconds as handcuffs clicked around their wrists. Simultaneously, Team Charlie stormed the prestigious law offices of Walsh and Carmichael. The partners were in their conference room, the bright overhead lighting illuminating legal documents spread across mahogany tables. Defense attorney Benjamin Walsh looked up from his papers just as muscular FBI agents filled the doorway. "Benjamin Walsh and Patricia Carmichael," the team leader announced, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit bribery, money laundering, and obstruction of justice." Patricia Carmichael dropped her coffee cup, the liquid spreading across expensive legal briefs as federal agents moved to secure the office. Years of corrupt deals and illegal arrangements were finally catching up to them. Back at the courthouse, Judge Hargrove was being led away in handcuffs, his black robes now seeming like a mockery of justice rather than a symbol of it. Sergeant Reynolds watched with quiet satisfaction as the man who had tried to deny him justice was finally held accountable. "How does it feel, Judge?" Agent Vaughn asked as they escorted him through the courthouse halls. "How does it feel to be on the receiving end of the system you corrupted?" Meanwhile, District Attorney Megan Stewart stood before a crowd of reporters on the courthouse steps, her red dress suit brilliant in the natural daylight. Camera flashes popped continuously as she prepared to reveal the full extent of the corruption network. "Today marks a historic day in our fight against judicial corruption," she announced, her voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Federal agents have arrested Judge Theodore Hargrove, defense attorneys Benjamin Walsh and Patricia Carmichael, and defendants Trevor and Christopher Blackstone in connection with a massive bribery and corruption scheme. Detective Stephen Choi stepped up beside her, his green polo shirt and blue jacket a stark contrast to her formal red attire. In his hands, he held thick folders containing months of financial investigation. Our investigation has uncovered evidence of $2.3 million in bribes paid to Judge Hargrove over a 5-year period, Detective Choi announced. We have identified 47 cases that were illegally influenced by this corruption network, affecting hundreds of victims who were denied justice. The crowd of reporters erupted with questions, cameras focusing on every detail as the scope of the corruption became clear. Citizens who had watched the system fail them for years finally saw accountability in action. Agent Vaughn's voice crackled over the radio as the final arrests were completed. All targets are in custody. Operation Clean Sweep is a complete success. Sergeant Reynolds stood on the courthouse steps beside the law enforcement team, his military decorations gleaming in the bright sunlight. The same steps where he had left in defeat months earlier now witnessed his complete vindication. The evidence we've gathered, District Attorney Stewart continued, shows a systematic pattern of corruption that reached the highest levels of our judicial system. But today proves that no one, no matter their position or power, is above the law. In custody, Judge Hargrove sat in a federal holding cell, his black robes replaced with orange prison clothing. The weight of his crimes was finally catching up to him as he faced the reality of spending his remaining years behind bars. The man who had once held others' fates in his hands now faced judgment himself. The Blackstone brothers sat in adjacent cells, their expensive lifestyle and criminal connections no longer able to protect them. Years of buying their way out of consequences had come to an abrupt end. Defense attorneys Walsh and Carmichael faced not only criminal charges, but the complete destruction of their legal careers. Their law licenses would be revoked, their reputations destroyed, their freedom forfeit. As the sun reached its zenith over the city, casting everything in brilliant natural light, justice had finally been served. The corruption network that had operated in shadows for years was exposed and dismantled. Sergeant Marcus Reynolds, the decorated Marine who had refused to be silenced, stood vindicated as the hero he had always been. Agent Claire Vaughn looked at him with deep respect, her red blazer catching the sunlight as she extended her hand. Justice delayed is not justice denied, Sergeant. Today proved that. No, ma'am, he replied, his voice strong and proud. Today proved that the truth always finds a way to shine through, no matter how dark they try to make it. The wheels of justice had turned slowly, but they had turned completely. A corrupt judge, criminal defendants, and their enablers were finally facing the consequences of their actions. The system had been tested and ultimately proven strong enough to root out its own corruption. Today was a victory not just for Sergeant Reynolds, but for every citizen who believed that justice should be blind to wealth, power, and corruption. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Federal Courtroom 4A, casting bright natural light across the polished wooden benches and gleaming marble floors. Overhead fluorescent fixtures provided additional illumination, ensuring every corner of the spacious room was brilliantly lit. This was not the same dim, oppressive courtroom where Judge Theodore Hargrove had perverted justice months earlier. This was a place where truth would finally have its day. Sergeant Marcus Reynolds sat in the front row, his blue dress military uniform immaculate, every ribbon and medal precisely positioned on his chest. His blue service jacket hung perfectly, the fabric crisp and commanding respect from everyone in the room. The same uniform that Judge Theodore Hargrove had dismissed with racist contempt now represented the integrity that would bring down an entire corruption network. Judge Patricia Morrison, a distinguished African-American woman with 25 years of federal judicial experience, presided from the bench with quiet authority. Her reputation for fairness and thorough legal analysis had made her the perfect choice to oversee this high-profile corruption trial. She wore traditional black judicial robes, but her presence radiated the kind of impartial justice that had been so brutally absent from Judge Theodore Hargrove's courtroom. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn stood at the prosecution table, her red suit jacket and black slacks providing a stark contrast to the sea of dark suits surrounding her. She held a thick folder containing months of meticulous investigation, every piece of evidence carefully documented and verified. Her partner, Detective Stephen Choi, sat beside her wearing a blue dress shirt and blue jacket. His financial analysis reports spread across the table in organized stacks. The prosecution calls Sergeant Marcus Reynolds to the stand. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn announced, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. Sergeant Marcus Reynolds rose with military precision, his polished dress shoes clicking against the marble floor as he approached the witness stand. Court reporter Lila Bennett, wearing a professional red blouse and navy skirt, positioned her hands over the stenographic machine, ready to capture every word of testimony that would finally reveal the complete truth. Sergeant Reynolds, FBI Agent Claire Vaughn began, her voice steady and professional. Please tell the court about the events of March 15th, when you were brutally assaulted by Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone. Sergeant Marcus Reynolds straightened in his chair, his voice clear and unwavering. I was leaving Romano's restaurant downtown when I witnessed Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone physically assaulting a young woman in the parking lot. She was screaming for help, and they were hitting her repeatedly. As a Marine and as a human being, I could not stand by and watch. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the soft clicking of Lila Bennett's stenographic machine. Every spectator leaned forward, finally hearing the truth that had been suppressed for so long. When I approached and ordered them to stop, Sergeant Marcus Reynolds continued, Trevor Blackstone turned to me and said, "Mind your own business, soldier boy, or you'll regret it." Christopher Blackstone laughed and made racist comments about my uniform and my service. I remained calm and professional, identifying myself as a Marine Sergeant and asking them to leave the woman alone. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn nodded, encouraging him to continue. What happened next, Sergeant? Trevor Blackstone swung at me with a metal tire iron he grabbed from his car. I defended myself using standard military training, but both brothers attacked me simultaneously. They were shouting racial slurs and threatening to have me arrested. Christopher Blackstone specifically said his family owned judges and that I would never see justice. A murmur rippled through the courtroom gallery. Judge Patricia Morrison gave lull for silence, her expression stern but sympathetic. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn approached the evidence table and lifted a large monitor. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A1 through A7, security camera footage from 7 different angles showing the assault on Sergeant Reynolds. The screens throughout the courtroom lit up with crystal clear footage showing Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone viciously attacking Sergeant Marcus Reynolds. The video clearly showed the defendants initiating violence while Sergeant Marcus Reynolds attempted to de-escalate the situation. The racist language was audible, and their unprovoked aggression was undeniable. As the court can see, FBI Agent Claire Vaughn explained, Sergeant Reynolds was the victim of an unprovoked hate crime. Yet when this case appeared before Judge Theodore Hargrove, these charges were dismissed within minutes. She moved to her next exhibit, a thick folder of financial documents. Detective Stephen Choi will now present his findings regarding Judge Theodore Hargrove's financial corruption. Detective Stephen Choi stood, adjusting his green shirt and blue jacket as he approached the witness stand. His normally calm demeanor carried an undercurrent of righteous anger as he began his testimony. Your Honor, our investigation uncovered systematic financial corruption spanning 5 years. Judge Theodore Hargrove received exactly $2.3 million in bribes from Blackstone Crime Enterprises through shell companies operated by defense attorneys Benjamin Walsh and Patricia Carmichael. He displayed a complex financial chart showing money flows between various accounts. The pattern was consistent. Blackstone family members or associates would be arrested. Attorneys Walsh and Carmichael would represent them. Bribes would flow through offshore accounts to Judge Hargrove's hidden bank accounts, and charges would be dismissed or sentences drastically reduced. Judge Patricia Morrison studied the documents carefully. How many cases were affected by this corruption, Detective Choi? 47 documented cases, Your Honor. Assault charges, drug trafficking, money laundering, extortion, and even attempted murder charges were dismissed or reduced through this bribery scheme. Sergeant Reynolds' case was simply the latest victim of this systematic corruption. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn returned to center stage, her red jacket seeming to symbolize the passion for justice that had driven this investigation. Your Honor, I'd like to call court reporter Lila Bennett to provide insider testimony about Judge Theodore Hargrove's courtroom conduct. Lila Bennett approached the stand nervously, her red blouse and professional demeanor reflecting her commitment to accurate court reporting. She had risked her career to expose the truth, and now her moment had arrived. Miss Bennett, FBI Agent Claire Vaughn began gently. You worked as Judge Theodore Hargrove's court reporter for 3 years. Did you observe patterns of bias or corruption? Lila Bennett's voice started softly but grew stronger with each word. Judge Hargrove consistently treated minority defendants with contempt and disrespect. He would interrupt their attorneys, make racist comments off the record, and clearly demonstrate bias. When certain defense attorneys appeared, particularly Benjamin Walsh and Patricia Carmichael, he would dismiss serious charges without proper consideration of evidence. Can you provide specific examples? In Sergeant Reynolds' case, Judge Hargrove refused to view security camera footage. He made derogatory comments about Sergeant Reynolds' military service and dismissed charges before hearing complete testimony. I documented every instance of bias and improper judicial conduct. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn presented another folder of evidence. Ms. Bennett provided us with detailed records of Judge Theodore Hargrove's misconduct in 47 separate cases. Her courage in coming forward was essential to exposing this corruption network. The prosecution's case built methodically, each piece of evidence reinforcing the massive scope of Judge Theodore Hargrove's corruption. Financial records, recorded conversations, surveillance footage, and witness testimony created an overwhelming picture of systematic judicial misconduct. Your Honor, FBI Agent Claire Vaughn announced, I'd like to present Exhibit C1, recorded conversations between Judge Theodore Hargrove and the defendants, captured during our sting operation. The courtroom speakers crackled to life with Judge Theodore Hargrove's arrogant voice, admitting to taking bribes and discussing future case fixes. His casual dismissal of justice and racist comments about minority defendants sent waves of disgust through the gallery. Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone sat at the defendant's table, their expensive navy suits and white shirts no longer providing the protection their family's money had once guaranteed. Their faces showed the dawning realization that their network of corruption had been completely exposed. Defense attorneys Benjamin Walsh and Patricia Carmichael faced their own criminal charges, their law licenses revoked and their reputations destroyed. The very system they had corrupted was now holding them accountable for their crimes. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn approached the jury box for her concluding statement. Ladies and gentlemen, Sergeant Marcus Reynolds represents everything honorable about military service and civic duty. He served his country with distinction, earned classified decorations for counter-terrorism operations, and risked his life to protect a stranger from assault. She gestured toward the defendant's table. Judge Theodore Hargrove, Trevor Blackstone, Christopher Blackstone, Benjamin Walsh, and Patricia Carmichael represent everything corrupt about abuse of power. They perverted justice, accepted bribes, and believed their wealth and connections placed them above the law. Her voice rose with passion. But justice delayed is not justice denied. Today the truth has been revealed. 47 corrupted cases have been exposed. $2.3 million in bribes have been documented. A decorated Marine's honor has been vindicated. Judge Patricia Morrison nodded thoughtfully as FBI Agent Claire Vaughn concluded her presentation. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony compelling, and the scope of corruption breathtaking in its systematic nature. The court will recess for deliberation, Judge Patricia Morrison announced. However, based on the overwhelming evidence presented, I am prepared to rule on the criminal charges and begin the process of reviewing all 47 affected cases for potential retrial or sentence modification. As the courtroom emptied, Sergeant Marcus Reynolds remained seated, his blue dress uniform and blue service jacket representing the integrity that had ultimately triumphed over corruption. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn approached him, her red suit jacket bright under the fluorescent lighting. "Justice is finally being served, Sergeant," she said quietly. "Your courage made all of this possible." Sergeant Marcus Reynolds stood, his military bearing proud and dignified. "I just did what any Marine would do. I stood up for what was right." The truth had been revealed, corruption exposed, and justice restored. The systematic dismantling of Judge Theodore Hargrove's network was complete, and Sergeant Marcus Reynolds' honor had been fully vindicated. 6 months had passed since the corruption network crumbled, and the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Marine Corps Ceremonial Hall, casting brilliant natural light across polished marble floors and gleaming military decorations. The overhead fluorescent lighting combined with the daylight created an atmosphere of dignity and honor that seemed to wash away the shadows of injustice that had once threatened to consume everything Sergeant Marcus Reynolds stood for. Marcus stood at attention in his immaculate blue dress uniform, every ribbon and medal perfectly aligned across his chest. The fabric crisp and commanding respect from every person in the packed auditorium. His blue service jacket bore the additional decorations he had earned through his courage in exposing the judicial corruption that had nearly destroyed his faith in the system he had sworn to protect. The months of investigation, testimony, and legal proceedings had etched new lines of wisdom around his eyes, but his posture remained that of a warrior who had fought the good fight and emerged victorious. The ceremony buzzed with quiet energy as distinguished guests filled every seat, their faces reflecting the gravity and celebration of this moment. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn sat in the front row, wearing a stunning red ceremonial dress that commanded attention while maintaining the professional dignity that had made her such a formidable investigator. Her presence served as a reminder that justice sometimes required unlikely alliances between military honor and federal law enforcement determination. Among the distinguished attendees, Marcus noticed several familiar faces that brought both satisfaction and a sense of closure to his long journey through the maze of corruption and vindication. Commander Sarah Mitchell, his former commanding officer, who had initially doubted his account of the judicial bias, now sat proudly in the third row, wearing her dress blues with obvious admiration for his perseverance. Her presence represented the military community's complete acceptance of his vindication and their recognition that his fight had ultimately strengthened their institution's commitment to justice. Nearby, Marcus spotted Maria Santos, the young woman whose defense from Trevor and Christopher Blackstone's assault had started this entire chain of events. She wore an elegant red blouse and dark blue skirt, her presence a powerful reminder that his actions had protected an innocent victim and prevented who knows how many future assaults by entitled criminals who believed their wealth made them untouchable. Her grateful smile across the crowded auditorium reinforced that his sacrifice and struggle had been worthwhile beyond any personal vindication. General Patricia Morrison, wearing her full dress uniform with silver stars gleaming under the bright lights, approached the podium with the measured steps of someone who understood the weight of the moment. Her voice carried across the silent auditorium as she began the ceremony that would officially restore Marcus Reynolds to his rightful place among America's most honored service members. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, fellow Marines. We gather today not just to honor one man's courage, but to celebrate the principles that make our democracy strong when good people refuse to remain silent in the face of corruption and injustice. The general's words resonated through the hall as she detailed the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them to this moment. She spoke of Marcus Reynolds' exemplary military service, his classified operations that had protected American interests around the world, and his unwavering commitment to justice even when the system seemed stacked against him. Sergeant Marcus Reynolds faced a choice that would have broken lesser men. He could have accepted the injustice, walked away, and allowed corruption to continue festering in our judicial system. Instead, he stood firm in his convictions and helped expose a network of corruption that had compromised dozens of cases and millions of dollars in illegal transactions. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn rose from her seat and walked to the stage, her red dress catching the light as she carried a Distinguished Civilian Service Award. Her investigation had not only vindicated Marcus, but had earned her a promotion to Deputy Director. Recognition that her methodical approach and unwavering dedication to truth had dismantled one of the most significant judicial corruption cases in federal history. "Sergeant Reynolds," Claire began, her voice steady and filled with genuine admiration, "your courage in coming forward and your willingness to trust the investigative process allowed us to build a case that has restored faith in our judicial system and ensured that justice prevailed over corruption and privilege." As she pinned the Civilian Service Award to his uniform, Marcus felt the weight of vindication settle over him like a warm embrace. The months of uncertainty, the sleepless nights wondering if his career and reputation would survive the fight against such powerful adversaries, all faded in the bright light of this moment of complete recognition. The audience erupted in sustained applause as General Morrison presented Marcus with a congressional commendation for extraordinary civilian service. The medal represented not just personal vindication, but acknowledgement that his actions had strengthened the very foundations of American justice. District Attorney Megan Stewart, wearing a sharp red blazer and black slacks, took the podium to deliver updates that demonstrated the far-reaching impact of Marcus's courage. Her voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had seen justice truly served after months of painstaking legal work. The corruption network that Sergeant Reynolds helped expose has been completely dismantled. Former Federal Judge Theodore Hargrove is now serving a 15-year sentence in federal prison for judicial corruption, money laundering, and racketeering. His assets have been seized, and he will never again have the opportunity to pervert justice from the bench. She continued with evident satisfaction. Trevor Blackstone and Christopher Blackstone received 8-year sentences for aggravated assault and conspiracy. Their convictions send a clear message that wealth and family connections cannot shield anyone from the consequences of criminal behavior. The audience listened intently as she detailed the complete scope of justice that had been served. Defense attorneys Benjamin Walsh and Patricia Carmichael had been disbarred and were serving 5-year prison sentences for their roles in the bribery scheme. Their law firm had been dissolved, and their assets used to compensate victims of the corrupted cases they had facilitated. Detective Stephen Choi, wearing a crisp green shirt and blue jacket, presented a financial summary that demonstrated the thoroughness of their investigation. His forensic accounting had traced every dollar of the $2.3 million in bribes, recovered the funds, and established a victim compensation program that had already begun distributing restitution to those whose cases had been corrupted by Judge Hargrove's criminal network. 47 cases have been reviewed and retried where necessary, Detective Choi reported. 17 defendants who had received unjust sentences have been released or had their sentences reduced, while 12 cases that were improperly dismissed have been reopened and prosecuted successfully. Court reporter Leila Bennett, wearing an elegant red dress suit, received recognition for her courage in providing crucial testimony that had helped establish the pattern of judicial bias and corruption. Her willingness to come forward had been instrumental in building the case that brought down the entire network. FBI Director Jonathan Hayes, distinguished in his orange dress shirt and blue ceremonial jacket, addressed the broader implications of the investigation. His words carried the authority of someone who had overseen one of the most successful corruption investigations in Bureau history. This case demonstrates that our system of justice, while sometimes tested by corruption and abuse of power, ultimately holds those accountable who attempt to subvert it. Sergeant Reynolds' courage and Agent Vaughn's investigation have strengthened our democracy and reminded us all that justice delayed is not necessarily justice denied. The ceremony continued with testimonials from fellow Marines, FBI agents, and community leaders who had witnessed Marcus's character throughout the ordeal. Each speaker reinforced the narrative of a man who had stood firm in his principles when it would have been easier to walk away and accept injustice. As the formal presentations concluded, Marcus was invited to address the assembled crowd. He walked to the podium with the confident stride of someone who had faced his greatest test and emerged victorious. His blue uniform and blue jacket symbolizing both military honor and civilian courage. 6 months ago, I thought my faith in justice had been shattered, Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the bright auditorium. I had served my country with pride, only to find myself facing a system that seemed determined to protect the powerful while crushing those who dared to seek simple fairness. He paused, his eyes moving across the faces of young Marines in the audience, understanding that his words carried the weight of experience and vindication. But I learned that our system is only as strong as the people who are willing to fight for it. Agent Vaughn, District Attorney Stewart, Detective Choi, and so many others proved that corruption cannot stand when good people refuse to look the other way. His voice grew stronger as he continued. To the young Marines in this audience, I want you to understand that wearing this uniform means more than following orders and serving overseas. Sometimes it means standing up for justice right here at home, even when the odds seem impossible and the opposition seems too powerful to overcome. The applause that followed was thunderous and sustained, reflecting not just appreciation for his words, but recognition of the journey he had traveled from victim to victor. The bright lights of the ceremony seemed to symbolize the illumination of truth that had swept away the shadows of corruption. As the ceremony concluded, Marcus stood surrounded by the people who had helped him achieve this moment of complete vindication. FBI Agent Claire Vaughn, her red dress symbolizing the passion for justice that had driven her investigation, smiled with the satisfaction of someone who had seen a difficult case through to its rightful conclusion. The transformation was complete. The man who had once faced dismissal and disrespect in Judge Hargrove's corrupt courtroom now stood as a symbol of courage and integrity, his honor not just restored, but elevated to serve as an inspiration for others facing similar battles against corruption and injustice. The bright sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to illuminate not just the ceremony, but the broader victory of principle over privilege, courage over corruption, and justice over the abuse of power. Marcus Reynolds had entered this fight as one man standing against a seemingly insurmountable system of corruption, and he emerged as a reminder that individual courage, supported by dedicated allies, could still triumph over the most entrenched networks of abuse and privilege. The story that had begun with injustice in a corrupt courtroom ended with honor in a hall dedicated to celebrating those who serve their country and defend its highest principles, proving that sometimes the arc of justice, while long and difficult, ultimately bends toward those brave enough to fight for what is right. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.